Hello, gentlemen. Good evening to this post-budget discussion that we are going to have. Really appreciate taking this time out. I'm super enthused viewers. Very nice to have you this evening here. Given the profile of the panel today that we have, there is absolutely no need for neither the topic introduction nor those guests need any sort of identification, at least by me, from a formality point of view. If I may just set the context, we all sort of agree, at least in this budget, there has been an intent that has come out very clear that budget is going to an non-event going forward. And why I'm saying this, it is not merely because of there is a glaring absence of any populist measure that we generally come across in a budget speech of the finance minister. Some might defend that there is no major election in sight or there have been no compelling political scenarios. We are not getting into that. But pure play from an economist, from an analyst lens, the general exercise has changed a bit. And the union budget is an annual statement of accounts. While primarily that remains an accounting exercise, let me justify why I say so. When I say this, it is not an annual statement of accounts. What I refer to is actually, it's a sort of mirror to state's economic philosophy, its institutional maturity and the confidence about the future. Budget is not just, it is preceded by economic survey where we give the actual details and then we outline the future. So in that sense, it is not a pure accounting. And just to add to it, budget 2026 comes at a moment when we as a country are not very exception to the rest of the world. We're navigating the global fragmentation. There are fiscal constraints in different pockets and heightened expectations of governance credibility. It raises some fundamental questions in the context of budget. Are we strengthening the architecture of growth? Are we improving the quality of state intervention? And are we building trust between taxpayer, the market, and the sovereign, the state? So to decode these deeper signals, we have with us a truly distinguished panel, individuals who have shaped policy, administered revenue, upheld judicial discipline, and set standards of professional integrity. Their collective experience spans the full spectrum of policy design, execution, and adjudication. With this, let me now introduce you to our panelists for this evening. To start with Dr. Amajit Chopra, he is the former president of the ICAI, that is the regulator for the accounting profession in this country. Dr. Chopra offers 4 decades of perspectives on fiscal discipline and regulatory policy. He has been part of several PSU boards and advisory role. He has been the chairman of NACAS. He has been member of Investor Education and Protection Fund and the audit committee chairman for large public sector banks. Then we move to our next speaker, Mr. Pramod Kumar. He is a former vice president of the Income Tax Appellate Tribunal. He has spent more than 2 decades in that role. He has been part of some of the most busiest and complex bench that he has headed in this country across geography. He brings that dedicated lens to budget interpretation and the tax jurisprudence. He is a qualified lawyer and a chartered accountant. He has published so many insightful papers and very incisive commentary he writes. Then I come to our next speaker, Mr. Robin Banerjee. He has been the head of finance for various large organizations in this country. So essentially, he will bring the value creation side, which is what the heart and soul of an economy. I mean, others advise, others adjudicate, interpret where the business, so they are the real value creator. Robin Banerjee brings sharp insights on value creation governance. So we start with Dr. Amajit Chopra, if you're fine, sir.
Thank you.
So if you can very briefly give your opening remark, the way you look at this budget. And as an add-on, if you can just take up this question, whether it is growth versus prudence. So we spoke about the global uncertainty. Maybe if you can just share your thoughts whether the budget has struck a right balance between sustaining growth momentum and restoring fiscal credibility.
Very frankly, this is a budget which can be considered to be pretty boring from the point of view of the middle class. But if you look at it from a different angle, and if you look even at the economic survey, see, this budget has come in the midst of a period of total uncertainty. We have had issues so far as the US is concerned. Of course, we had a deal with Europe. And besides that, we have the Ukraine war going on. We have the Iran tension, which is going on between US and Iran for that matter. And if I look at all those uncertainties, But even in amidst those uncertainties, India has been doing pretty well on the economic front. I think India have done reasonably well so far as that part is concerned. This is the ninth budget presented by the Honorable Finance Minister, Mrs. Nirmala Sitharaman, and she will be becoming equal to Mr. Morarji, who presented 10 budgets. Basically, next year, if she is able to present the budget. One thing that needs to be said is that this budget has some positives, but it has some negatives also. One cannot say that it is only positive. Positives is that it definitely looks at the sustained growth. When I talk of the sustained growth, if you allocate out of 53 lakh crore budget, about more than 12 lakh crore rupees for the capital outlays. My only apprehension is that, and this is something which I've been writing also, that any presentation of the budget is incomplete without giving as to what was given in the last budget, what was the kind of allocation in the last budget, and how much thereof it was used, and for what purposes it was used. I think unless we are able to give an outcome or impact analysis of the earlier budgets, no budget is complete. Unfortunately, in India, it has never happened. Ever since independence, if wants to look at the government accounting, how many assets and what kind of assets have been created, what is the value thereof, we don't have that value today. We have moved on from a budget of 197 crores in 1947 to a budget of more than 53 lakh crore, and which was only 18 lakh crores in 2014. Which is a massive growth itself. Actually, within last 10 years, the budget has grown by more than 3 times. So if I look at the sustainable growth, I think the capital outlay is a wonderful thing. But I think the allocations to the health sector, allocations to the educational sector, I think there one feels dissatisfied. The allocations are lower. And one purpose that it fails to achieve in the entire budget today, we are dependent upon a lot of borrowings. More than 24% is coming from the borrowings, 18% comes from the corporate taxes, and 21% comes from the other personal taxation, if you really ask me. Personal taxation contributing more than the corporate taxes. So it is something amazing, very frankly, to me, if I have to look at it as an individual, which means the salaried class is being taxed far more heavily than the business class, if you really want to look at it. So to me, another thing which I've been saying is that India will continue to say that we are undertaxed, we don't have the number of the taxpayers which should be there. Because if you don't tax the agricultural income, and agricultural income is not taxing the farmers, agricultural income is taxing the jamidars basically, because the way agricultural income has been defined, any rent or revenue derived from the agricultural land used for the agricultural purposes. We have never tried to tax it because we always say that it is a state subject and the concurrence of the states will have to be obtained. So to that extent, there will be a limitation. 20% of our revenue receipt, the total budget, is going towards the interest costs on the borrowings. You see, in the last few years, what has been happening, and the government has been highly dependent upon the receipts from the RBI dividend. This year, it's going to be more than 3 lakh crores, basically. And last year also, it was in the range of about 2.75 or 2.8 lakh crores. And then unfortunately, our disinvestment targets have not been achieved. Last year only, we have been able to achieve about 23,000 crore rupees. Whereas this year, we have fixed a target of another 80,000 crore rupees. Whether it will be achieved or not, nobody knows. Because the budget does not say how much it was not achieved in the last year. Budget doesn't bring it out. But one good thing that the budget does this time is simplification of some of the laws, the tax laws for that matter. I think Pramodji will be able to touch upon it, particularly the buyback provisions, etc., the filing of the returns, etc., giving certain reliefs to the NRIs with regard to the undisclosed assets in certain matters, where, of course, the value of those things will be low, has been put at quite low. And besides that, of course, the taxation of the unexplained investments or the cash credits, unexplained cash credits, there a lot of relief has been given. There is no doubt about it. But it brings more uncertainty also in this particular budget, because if the people have gone to the court, obtained certain judgments, and you reverse those judgments today with retrospective effects. Now you look at the uncertainty with regard to the Tiger Global. This was one fine moment where the government could have gone ahead and tried to take care of the Tiger Global and said, no, we don't agree with that. and probably could have set the things in order, but it has not happened. On the contrary, we have made some retrospective amendments to tax more, basically. And similarly on the SGB, sovereignty gold bond, if the gold prices have increased and you expect that there is going to be an increase in the bond prices, you say that if you have purchased it from the secondary market, you are going to tax it because you are making profits out of it. I don't think that's really justified. You can say if you purchase it after this particular date, we will do it. Because the buyer should know at that particular point of time. You shouldn't be able to create more uncertainties out of it. Promotion of MSM is absolutely fine. Risk guarantee fund, absolutely fine. There is no doubt about it that all those things have happened. To my mind, this is a budget. So you may say that elections are not around the corner, but two elections she has kept in mind. West Bengal election also and the Tamil Nadu election also, to a very little extent. When you say that the seafood has been made cheaper for that matter. So probably West Bengal elections have been kept in mind to a little extent. So this is a budget which definitely tries to promote growth through the capital outlays, provided that capital outlay is sustained. I think that's very, very important. The fiscal deficit is under control, if all goes well, for that matter. But the fiscal deficit has been under control because of the various other factors that you have narrated earlier. Because if you get more dividends from the companies, now you look at all PSUs, the way the dividends have been paid by them, you compare to the private sector, I think all those things are fine. But at the same time, we need certainty from the tax practices. But this budget is anti-inflationary. It does not add to the inflation at all. And I think to that extent, it's absolutely fine in my view.
It's a great stat. That's a rather sobering but constructive way to look at whether a lot of trade-offs involved. There is no white or black shade. So I think as we go further on everything, once we have a very layered conversation, we'll definitely agree on these things because there are two sides to each of this aspect. I move on to our next speaker, Mr. Ravindra Ji, and again, continue the theme. Again, we just focus on the big picture. So this is a reform era, and that is in progress right from 91. But now one would definitely agree the pace has been phenomenally high in last few years. But in every budget, they would expect what are the reforms, whether they're in obvious or a hidden form. So in your view, sir, is it a shift? I mean, has there been a transition from short-term fiscal firefighting or to a long-term nation building, or there is still we are clinging on to the incrementalism, which we just give a name as reform?
Thank you so much, Rachi. This is a budget of tomorrow, not for today. Everything can be criticized, so is the budget document, of course. After all, there is X quantum of money which has to be spent, and every sector needs more money, be it education, be it defense, be it capital expenditure. There is unending desire to put in money, but we can only do so much. The way I see, because I say the budget is for tomorrow, I think the budget talks about 7 strategic intent. And the first strategic intent, which everyone is talking about, is the capital expenditure production, of course. This adds a lot of things together. The budget makes 6 other strategic intent. One is manufacturing. It is perhaps for the first time, it has given adequate focus on the fact that our manufacturing share to GDP has not been growing beyond 12 to 13 or 14%, and we're starting at that. No country can become Viksit or developed nation on its manufacturing ratio goes up to the GDP. The second or the third, if I may say, first is capex, second is manufacturing. Third is they focused on the most affected area due to textile. The textile is the biggest sufferer. So they focused on textile, came out with 5 different action plans and say that can we still do something to the textile sector. Fortunately, Trump tariff may come down. I'm saying may because still it is signed, there is no sanctity. And number 2, even if it is signed, Mr. Trump has the ability to withdraw on the next day if he's not happy with it, whatever Mr. Modi is doing. The fourth is semiconductor. That's the future. So the budget talks about the future technology, semiconductor. The budget has not forgotten about agri, whether it is fisheries or otherwise, or modern food like nuts. They are focused on coconut, for instance. It is such granularity. There are 300 million families are dependent have to revisit the FEMA itself. So in short, it's a budget definitely for the future. Everything can be criticized. But the fact that 7 important areas have been focused upon, yes, there is one more, which is tourism, because that adds to employment. And tourism, which has not been focused enough in the past, is something they have done real good job in this budget, I feel. So yeah, it is definitely a budget for the future and not for the future.
Absolutely. Thank you. Move to Mr. Pramod Kumar for his opening remark, and obviously he brings his long experience in the area of tax adjudication at a tribunal level. Sir, it's again in the context of tax reform. So the generally people expect that there has to be policy certainty. They don't want surprises. Neither the business nor anyone would favor even the tax administrators. The lack of stability in tax policies is not something welcomed by anyone. However, in an era of reform, there is always a merit in experiencing some sort of disruption. Otherwise, they'll say it is used as a convenient substitute to the reform just to avoid any hard decision. So people might prefer to maintain status quo. How do you see that this budget in that context, whether it has endorsed its reform approach or it has remained quiet on that front, sir?
Thank you, Sabya. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this distinguished panel. And it's an honor to be in the panel where Mr. Robin Banerjee is present. I'm a huge admirer of his work. And Dr. Chopla is present. He was so visible face of the profession for a long time. Now, I'll make a small comment on what 2 of my distinguished co-panelists have said, and then I'll answer your question. First thing is, when Dr. Chopla said, it's a little boring. It does nothing for the middle class. Now, when you say it's boring, in simple English, it means there's nothing headline grabbing in the budget. It doesn't have answers to every question or every imperfection you can imagine, whether it exists or there or not. Yes, it may not have, but over a period of time. And it's my 5th decade of interacting with the tax laws. I started it way back in 1983. I can tell you, you cease to be impressed by the noise and the novelty. What really impresses you is the continuity, stability, and the endurance. So when I see from that perspective, there may be a certain element of a status quo in the budget, in the sense it does nothing dramatic. It doesn't bring down the rates. It doesn't introduce a new scheme which seems to be out of the blue, but it has a continuity in whatever they are doing. And what it also shows is that, yes, we are on the right path so far as particularly taxation policies are concerned, and we'll continue to consolidate and strengthen the work we are doing. So to that extent, we have to see this as a kind of, I would think, reformist budget with continuity from the perspective of the direct taxes. As to what Mr. Banerjee said, and that was also very thoughtful, that it's not a budget for today, it's a budget for tomorrow. So I would assume when you say so, you are saying that this is a budget which is in tune for the aspirations of the things as they are going to be. So for a changing world, the way things are changing, you are in tune to catch up with those values. And when you talk of the investment in infrastructure and being thoughtful enough to think of things like semiconductor, how do you keep pace with the changes on the textile front because of the tariff issues? I think that's where the thoughtfulness is evident. When you say what is my first thought on the budget, it may not have the dazzle. It may not have that headline grabbing stuff, that novelty. But yes, what it has is, it has that commitment to continued reforms. And if you really see that approach, you will find it everywhere in the budget, and more so in the tax policies. I'll come to that specific aspect a little later. One more thing which was said by Mr. Chopra was, with respect to the Tiger Global, with respect to the middle class, with respect to the stability. The Tiger Global judgment came on 15th of January. That was just a fortnight before the budget was to come. So address those concerns would have been expecting too much. And there are more pressing things for the budget makers to bother about. Yes, stability is a cause of concern. It's something, not cause of concern, it's an emphasis. It's underlying emphasis in everything they do. But then you have to wait for time. You cannot expect in 15 days you have the answers. Now, when you think of the retrospective amendments, etc., and you think of the what more could be done for the middle class, I think retrospective amendments certainly are not good. They don't do any good to the tax policy in general. And sometimes the means you adopt to do even a right thing becomes more damaging to the larger cause than a defeat in that cause. So I personally speaking would say that no, it is something which could have been avoided. One could have waited for the judicial outcome. Having said that, I must also say that the very approach that people adopt, a highly pedantic approach, trying to figure out all possible interpretations where you go away from the substantive justice and then concentrate on these areas which promote instability, which promote the kind of tax uncertainty, that's equally bad. And to expect also that I'll keep on inventing all kind of things and you will have the static solution to my dynamic problems. That's also unfair. Governments, the establishment has to deal with the problems they face. And if they face a problem which they have not been able to visualize earlier, and for good reasons, then there is no harm in saying that, yes, this is something where you went entirely off tangent beyond what was intended, and therefore I look for a solution. And every time there is a retrospective amendment to the law, having played a small role in the part of the judicial machinery, I also think that it's a time for the judicial officer to also do introspect as to how far away he was from the legislative intent. Then law itself had to be amended. In the name of interpretation of law, what really do we do? Or what every tax judge, whether you call him a member or you call him a judge or he adorns the highest office, what does he do? He tries to give meaning to the words of the statute. And then you use various tools to this exercise. When these tools become insufficient and they are unable to keep pace with a far more remunerative exercise of finding holes in these statutes, then you have to improvise. And that's what is done. So to answer your question coming again, budget may not impress you with that kind of novelty. It may not make the transient noise. But yes, what it does is it gives stability, it gives endurance, it gives continuity to a work being good done. And I'm sure as we'll discuss specific things a little later, you will see them in action. Yes, it may not be answer to every perceived imperfection, but that's not what budgets are supposed to do every year. They would always be. I'll just tell you one. I'll take 60 seconds to tell you a story. Long ago, I had read a book written by Prakash Krishnan. Prakash Krishnan was an ICS officer, and he retired in 60s or 70s. So you can imagine what generation he belonged to. And in the preface to his book, he mentioned a story which I want to narrate to you. The story was like this. When he went to school in his early days, his teacher used to ask him a question that if there's a bucket to be filled with the water, bucket has a capacity of X liters, water is coming at the rate of the Y liters, and bucket has some holes, because of which he loses water from the bucket at the rate of Z liter. How long will it take to fill the bucket? And he said to himself, like an innocent child, he said, what a stupid question. Why can't they plug the holes first and fill the bucket later? And then what Prakash Krishnan wrote next was something I'll never forget in my life. He said, it took me 37 years in the bureaucracy to understand that holes will never be plugged. But bucket is to be filled nevertheless. And my lifelong challenge is that despite these holes, I have to fill the bucket. So I would think that when you think of the budget exercise, when you think of the lawmaking, that is that role of filling the bucket despite the holes. And all of us contribute in our own way. Maybe Dr. Chopra contributes a bit more as a part of the think tank for the defending the taxpayers, and others do it in a little lesser way. But everybody is contributing to creating those holes, and somebody has to still fill the bucket. So have pity with the man with whose job is to fill the bucket also.
Wonderful. So that's a quintessential Mr. Pramod Kumar's way of making very serious points in a rather what do you say? It's simple for us. And one good thing at the end of this first round, we see there's a cohesion. It is not that one argument is pitted against another, but we all are on the path of reform and nothing is free of complete imperfections. So therefore, we need to live with that. But yes, we can have our own views on certain policy or even the plans that the regime might have. With that, we go to our next round, and this time I go to Dr. Chopra with a very pertinent point on ease of doing business. I mean, in a narrow engagement with the tax authorities. We have seen a lot of reforms on that front, whether it is rapid digitization of the compliance process, the adjudication, the assessment, and one of the predominant objective could have been just to reduce the direct engagement between the taxpayers and the taxpayer for certain obvious reasons. The core objective of doing a fair assessment can still be achieved without personal meetings. So I'm referring to the faceless assessment and the litigation management. So do you see this budget meaningfully reduces friction between the taxpayers and the state? Because there are some structural pain points, they have been there for decades. So they are still intact, or you see we are doing enough on the ease of doing front? Because that's a parameter that we would like to assess ourselves even before commenting upon it.
Yeah, Sabya, let me first start on one note that when I said it is boring, it was more in the sense that it does make headlines, very frankly. But as I said earlier also, it tries to maintain or sustain the growth. There is no doubt in my mind. The point which you have raised right now is whether certain holes or certain frictions which were there in the tax laws have been sought to be removed or not. As I said to begin with, and will maintain that, barring this retrospective legislations or getting into whatever way the SGB bonds have been taxed, basically on the secondary sale, the people who had purchased it in the secondary market. I personally feel a lot has been done to ease the business performances. If you really ask me, you have extended the time for filing the returns. You have decriminalized certain provisions. You have gone into the extent of even decriminalizing the things with regard to FEMA when it comes to holding of the certain assets, undisclosed assets under the tax laws. You have facilitated disclosures in this particular budget. Of course, the amount could be lesser of those assets. I think the amount could have been more rather than the amount which has been mentioned therein. I have been very impressed, at least with one change, which definitely talks of that the government is on the path of listening to the people, listening to the grievances of the business. In the earlier budget, with regard to the buyback, they had certain provisions, which they have now actually, there were certain things which should not have been there. When you used to buy back the shares, the company will buy back the shares, the entire amount in the hands of the person could be taxed. And you could claim the cost of those shares as the loss. Now, unless you had the gains from the capital, you would not have been able to get that loss benefit. This time what they have said is that it will be taxed as a capital gain. I think that's very logical, really ask me. And as I said earlier also, unexplained investment, the unexplained cash credits, etc. In all cases, the punishment has been reduced. The level of the taxes have been reduced from 60 to 30% for that matter. For all practical purposes, these things have happened and the benefits have been given to the people. And the taxpayer must now act honestly. That's also, even if you look at the indirect taxes, you look at the custom, in particularly the way the credit notes for discounts were to be given. Now they have eased that. Even subsequent to that, even if it is not in invoice, you can give the credit note for the discount, and probably the accounting for that and the claiming of that discount has been made far easier today than what it was in the earlier budgets. So what I would like to say is that ease of doing business has been one of the goals, and that is where I agree with Parmodji and Robinji both, for that matter, that this budget definitely aims at the continuance of one thing. Whatever policies have been there for the last few years, those policies have been continued. It's not that the policies have been discontinued. And if you do that, you create certain faith in the public. And that faith has to be retained. And it's for the taxpayers now to come back and say that whatever confidence you reposed in us, we are willing to justify that confidence. Now, the government has tried to do that. ICDS and INDES have been at a variance. Now, the government says that we will set up a group for alignment of the ICDS with the INDES. To me, there is no need for the group. If you ask me as a chartered accountant, you cannot have carve out in the INDES in any case. You cannot have a carve out because INDES are what is recognized in the world basically. These are based upon the IFRS. You cannot have a carve out in the INDES. Whatever carve outs were there, these were in the ICDS. So ICDS have to be aligned with the IFRS, the INDES. INDES have not to be aligned with the ICDS. So I think ultimately you will say that whatever profits have been computed in accordance with the INDES, these will be treated as the profit. And of course, whatever other provisions of the tax laws are there, these will be taken care of. This is how I feel about it. So probably to my mind, and then they have kept the ease of doing business. They are trying to facilitate doing the business. They have now come up with the concept of the corporate mitra. They say that ICSI and of course the ICMI the government will facilitate introduction of certain short-term courses so that the corporate mitras can be created. And they can actually help the various small businesses in the tier 2 and tier 3 cities to do the business in a better way. So if I look at overall, the budget has done well. I will say that no budget can be perfect for that matter. And even in a dream budget, you could find certain faults. So to me, it's a budget which has tried to help out the business. Of course, there could be ifs and buts in any kind of a budget.
Thank you for that grounding answer, sir. It really captured details which are otherwise missed in the headlines that we get to see. We move to the next point, and that we would like to take up with Mr. Pramod Kumar. Sir, it's about the tax policy again. It's beyond the slab and rate. Is there a signal that you see of great consequence in this budget on the tax certainty or compliance behavior, and more importantly, the investors' confidence?
Thank you, Sabya. First of all, I would agree with Dr. Chopra when he says that the biggest strength of the government is that they have their ears to the ground. And I say that in the terms of direct taxes much more than anything else. The government firmly has its ears to the ground, and the government has the ability and the willingness to do whatever it takes to go wherever it's required to go. We have seen this in the case of faceless assessments and faceless appeals. We have seen how well it has worked. What a new word it is. The first time I went to the income tax office was way back in 1980. How much things have changed since then? How much things have changed in the last 14 years? It's incredible. So government has that will, undoubtedly. Dr. Chopra is absolutely on the dot. The second thing is when you think of ease of doing business, and that is where tax certainty and the absence of misapprehensions, that becomes critical. I would mix the two things together, tax certainty along with no room for any kind of misapprehensions. But then one also has to bear in mind that today we have to move a step ahead of the ease of doing business. We have to move towards, as probably Mr. Banerjee indicated, we have to move towards a global capital, if I may say so. It's a strong word. It's a very ambitious word, but I deliberately use that. Global capital for promoting innovation and entrepreneurship. So when you think of ease of doing business, you also have to think of what others are offering. What's being offered in the best locations? How do I compete with them? There are two keys to the growth, and that is innovation and entrepreneurship. I don't know the third thing. So those are the things which are required to be borne in mind. For innovation, we could probably think of a stronger patent regime, stronger IP laws. For entrepreneurship, as you said, ease of doing business. But in ease of doing business, tax certainty is critical. How do you get tax certainty? When your outcomes, when the way you handle things is close to what's being handled in the places which are perceived as the best jurisdictions to do business. Now, as far as the dispute resolution part is concerned, I would think today we are at a stage where, despite the fact that our institutions are doing a wonderful job, we need to look at structural reforms. That is one area which I think reforms are needed. Take, for example, something as simple as expert witnesses. Involvement of the policymakers. If you don't use the expert witnesses, if you don't improve the quality of technical inputs in the judgments, I'm sure the international tax disputes would shift to MAP. It's a matter of time. They will say no to the conventional forums and they'll be happily going to the MAP, which is again something which probably would affect the tax sovereignty in the sense of adjudication certainty, adjudication sovereignty. So let's keep it aside for a later discussion. Now, when you talk of the signals, I would think number of signals, which the positive signals which the government has given. Most important, I would think, is the huge increase in the safe harbor. For 300 crores, you straight away go to 2,000 crores. Instead of taking a margin which was 17% to 20% in most of the cases, we have come to a reasonable margin of 15.5%. Entire problem regarding those different heads of services that has been addressed to a very large extent. Then you have the fast track APAs. Now, when the statute itself provides that you need to have APAs, which should be completed in 2 years, unless the taxpayer wants it, unless taxpayer wants more time. I think that's something very important. Decriminalization. That's another example of how thoughtful the government is. And I would think this is a brilliant example of the fact that government has ears to the ground. Now, please consider something as simple as Section 276CC. Not many people would know about it, but just think about it that if you do not file a tax return, what happens to you? Until 1st April 1975, it was not criminalized. When emergency was introduced, the first change in the income tax law, which was brought in post-emergency and during the peak of the emergency period, was that if you don't file a tax return, you can be sent to jail. And how much was the tax effect involved? 3,000 rupees. Now, from that 3,000 rupees, today it was, as on today, it's 10,000 rupees. Now, what really happens is you have a large number of people who do not file tax returns. And I'll give you a statistics given by the government. According to government statistics, there are at least 1.5 crore people where tax deductions have taken place from their income, but they have not filed returns. Let's say something like 10, 12 lakhs or 15 lakhs or 20 lakhs could be salaried employees. Now, think of it that it was something which was criminalized. Fortunately, for a long time, I would think last 10 years or so, government has taken a conscious stand not to resort to prosecution in these cases. But then changing the law took 51 years. It's only now that law is amended. They are saying, no, if it's below 10 lakhs, then we'll only impose a fine. But then this takes to a larger question. And then also think of the TDS cases. If you deduct tax at source and you don't deposit it, technically you are exposed to the criminal consequences. Now, these are the kind of things which everybody knew about, but nobody was talking about. They said, all right, we have given instructions to the field officers, you will not be prosecuting. That's not enough. The sword of prosecution hangs on his head. You are not at the mercy of the executive. Criminalization of an offense is a serious business. Similarly, for tax concealment, threshold was 10 lakhs. Threshold is 10 lakhs today. It was a very small amount earlier. Now that you have changed it, I have one more thought. Why should you put to a specific amount? Because again, the revision of this threshold will take God knows how many years. So why not make it a dynamic thing? Say 10 lakhs or 10% of the average income for last 3 years, whichever is higher. If I am Reliance Industries, I make a mistake of not depositing, let's say 20 lakhs rupees of some tax deposit in tax deduction at source, due to oversight it's missed at some place, or there's a concealment of income of 20 lakhs. Then is it something so serious that it warrants prosecution? Probably not. Then you need to have this kind of a dynamic solution. And of course, leave that part apart. The truth is that today somebody has applied his mind to it. And that's where I feel that government has its ear to the ground. TDS deduction, sometimes delays take place. Delays take place for 1 month, 2 months, but what kind of amount? 20,000 rupees. And then you are exposed to prosecution. This is where you need to recognize that government has been very thoughtful. Another area, for example, filing the revised returns after the reassessment notice. You issue me a reassessment notice, I realize my mistake, I say, all right, I want to revise my return and close the matter. Allow me the decent closure. And that's where you see that policy shift in everything that the government does, whether you do it in the revised returns, whether you do it in the decriminalization, whether you do it in the safe harbor, whether you do it in the adjustment in the returns of the associate enterprise post an APA, whether you do it by way of giving a conceptualizing fast track APS. That positivity is something which you see in every change that has been brought about. And I think that's a signal towards the kind of maturity, trust, and a positivity. And that's very critical in tax policy. If you have it, maybe it will take a while. It will not be in one single budget or 10 budgets or 15 budgets. We may take time to reach the destination, but the path is unambiguous. And that's what matters. So I would give my signal, I would say, respect, admiration to that trend. On the side of the tax certainty, yes, we need to do a little more. When I say we, I think of the government, all of us as a whole. Government needs to do a little more for the tax certainty, and that could be by strengthening the judicial institutions and ensuring that these judicial institutions have a better and systemic technical input also. But then the signals, the direction is beyond doubt. I would give 10 out of 10 for that.
Thank you, sir. It's a very comprehensive response, and I think you covered a series of things, and I never expected that the question would elicit an answer that kept us engrossed. And this reminds me of one thing. As I was pursuing CA some almost 20 years ago, Mr. Manohar is unfortunately not with us anymore. In one of the classes, he said that our income tax proceedings are not criminal proceedings. But once you see those prosecution sections and the offenses, seriousness attached to some of the action or omissions, they really scare you. And I think the deficit of trust between the taxpayers and taxes is a concern. I think as a country, we must respect the businesses. We can be a little more fair, and we should not prejudge or prejudiced when it comes to the entrepreneurs. And somehow, if I'm trained from the beginning that the corporates are here just to loot, or just profit maximization is their core objective, I think that thought process has to be diluted in the young minds. So they start looking at, they're not very confused to see the businessmen in this country, because like between the center and state, ever since we abandoned the Soviet model, which believed on a 5 years planning, I'm referring to the reform that we had, while center does bulk of the planning, but it is the state who has to lead the reforms. But if you see the factors of production, except money, except the banking, rest all are with the state. But when it comes to reforms, I think it's very convenient, or rather we have a tendency to not point finger, we just immediately central government come to our mind. It is never the states. But whereas states have equal, because in our constitutional scheme of things, they're coordinate to each other. It's not that one is subordinate to the other. Even otherwise, there have been enough check and balance. And of course, we are, due to paucity of time, we are not going. We have seen certain policy decisions in recently that has increased the responsibility of the state, which is a very welcome move. There are people who might criticize, who might have their own views. There are advocates, there are detractors to any policies, but I think the participation of the state, both in terms of empowerment and responsibility, is a very welcome thing. And you have
Savya, one small follow-up comment to the first limb of your observation. Until the Taxation Law Amendment Act 1975 came, the criminalization was not as glaring in the Income Tax Act. That is the amendment which brought the sea change. That's one observation. And I'm so happy that it's partly undone now. I don't want to sound political. I'm making a statement as a citizen, and I say this with responsibility. Second point, which I think you should have to bear in mind, how things have changed. Today, when an entrepreneur sitting in Delhi thinks of starting his business, he is not necessarily confined to India. He has 20 choices. Today, capital is so mobile, talent is so mobile. This is a new challenge. And what the government has to bear in mind is not the incremental reforms they bring, but how do they bring it in consonance or up to the expectations of that entrepreneur who is globally mobile. Like Robin today, if he has to start a business, he would think of choosing from Estonia, New York, London, or Bombay. And if Bombay doesn't give him the option which he wants, he would rather think of taking an e-residency in Estonia or shifting to US or Dubai or wherever, and does it. Once you bear that in mind, an entire perspective changes.
Mr. Banerjee, again back to the broad headlines. without pinpointing on any specific pillars. If one may just recount the major announcement, whether it is the major rail corridors, and you rightly alluded to the tourism, and that has a high potential employment engine in our economy. There have been several announcements, even the MSME context, the credit lines, or even the merger of banks. How do you see, sir, it addresses certain fundamental concerns in the economy? Because where I'm coming from, if somebody has to very dispassionately analyze the economy, our essential character remains where MSME is the backbone of our economy. They are in large numbers and they need all support. And government after government, they have come up with the policies just to bring relief to make their life easier. And we are developing a very vibrant startup culture as well to back it up. And there are large companies for which they act as feeders. Two of the expectation that was there, that there will be some announcement with regard to the disinvestment. And second thing, there was a contention that the farm laws should be brought back. Now it is in that context, how do you see, sir, this budget aims to address some of the structural issues that as an economy that we have been facing? We have been through multiple phases, and if we have to segmentalize that till 91, between independence 91, then till maybe 2010 or so and thereafter. So there are three phases. We have seen three different growth phenomenon. So where do you juxtapose this budgetary announcement to those reform agendas?
Almost every budget, whatever I have witnessed, I have seen that the budget more or less gives a lot of credence to giveaways. There'll be a budget where customs duty will be reduced. There'll be budgets where income taxes will be reduced. There are budgets where subsidies will be enhanced. This budget, I think, is for the first time focused on structural issues, building a new India. If I may see some hidden gems, I can see two or three hidden gems. One hidden gem is, again, for the first time I've noticed that during the course of the budget speech, they have continued to talk about industry-academia relationship. They have continued to talk about industry-academia-government relationships. This is a sea change. This is precisely we from India industry. We're trying to say that industry does not want what the academia produces, and academia produces what industry does not want, which leads to the second issue, skills. Why employment is the biggest problem? Because our education is not employable education. After having discussed industry-academia relationships, I think this budget does talk about skilling and education in different way. For the first time, the budget talks about the latest technology, not only in terms of semiconductor, but the fact that they are saying of orange economy. This is a sea change. In fact, I think most of the India's population will be 99.9 does not even know what does orange mean. What is this orange economy? Forget about how to build one for tomorrow. Of course, they're talking about building 5 university towns near logistic centers and so on and so forth, which is going to be the hubs for tomorrow. This is a sea change. So two soft aspects, which I think are hidden gems, which is not talked about, is one, industry, academia, government relationships. Talked about. I hope something will happen. I'm sure it will. And number two, this whole issue of skill building in the new economy is something really, really different. So these are the two soft aspects. Two hard aspects, hidden gems. It is not hidden, it is overtly available. The capex, 12 lakh capital expenditure. This is a huge thing. If they can do, and this year they've done it, this year they wanted to put in 11 lakh to 11.2 lakh to be spent, and they have spent 11.2 lakhs. So it seems. So it seems that they have spent on it. And if they can spend 12 lakh, that would be, of course, again, adding to the economy, which is something little different from what they had done in the past. And yes, they have really talked about industries where there is a lot of employment potential. You mentioned one, tourism for sure, textile is another, manufacturing is the third one, and agriculture is the fourth one. So sector after sector, whatever they have given importance to is all focused upon employment generation, including the coconut economy.
Thank you for such a lucid response. Yeah, this interaction between the industry and the academia probably, I think you pretty much, if I may connect what somebody already made a point about innovation, so we must learn to recognize the efforts, the innovation at that stage. I think Mr. Pramod Kumar, he said innovation and entrepreneurship, these are the two keys to growth. And you are pretty much echoing once, I think on one occasion, the finance minister herself, she was abroad, and one of the questions she responded that ironically, our workforce that are often not employable. And that's something I think the new education policy and different other framework to supplement to that hopefully will address that issue. And as we recognize these are structural, I mean, these are something which are inherited. It is not that this problem has just come up overnight, because you are talking of a system which had been operating from pre-independence era or immediately after that. Sir, with this, we go to Mr. Pramod Kumar. Sir, you have covered almost all major elements that were part of this budget. Now, just to conclude the conversation with you on the litigation and the rule of law front. From your judicial lens, sir, you have been a career adjudicator. So, does it really reduce tax litigation on ground, or we refuse to sort of openly acknowledge and address the inefficiency that is inbuilt to the system? In your view, sir, do you see there is a change in mindset? I mean, there is a genuine intent, and not just from government alone, the overall ecosystem, including the taxpayers, the business class, the consultant community, who can otherwise encourage people, because we are highly, we are extremely fascinated towards litigation. So do you see the overall litigation coming down, sir?
No, litigation is a cultural issue. And before I go to that, I'll just make a quick comment on what Robin said about the skill development and how it has to be in tune with what is the requirement of the day. Now, you have a skill development which is on the basis of what was required during the colonial period. Now, unless you have this cultural change, and one of the finest things which has happened in last, couple of decades, I would think, that is the change in that mindset. Now, people do not put the kind of premium to the clerical work or the kind of traditional skill sets which were required during the colonial period to the skill sets which are required now. So that's, similarly, when you think of the litigation also, I think it's a cultural issue. And it cannot be a one side being able to address all concerns. Just as the government cannot answer the concerns with regard to employment, unless that culture of looking for a particular kind of skills changes, government alone cannot address the litigation problem unless people start concentrating on the substantive issues. We need to have a culture which is more focused towards the compliance, which discourages litigation, which kind of gives certainty. And one also has to bear in mind that sometimes there is frivolous litigation, because sometimes this frivolous litigation yields results. If it stops bearing fruits, people will not go for it. When you blame people for going into that comma full stop arguments in the courts, please also bear in mind the fact that these are the things which have, given results in the past. The culture is changing. We are undergoing a cultural change, not only in terms of how we look at skills, how we look at our tax payments, how we look at our litigation also. Therefore, if you really ask me on the question, has the government done enough? My answer would be reasonably enough. You cannot make the systemic changes overnight. There are some changes which are required to be in the culture. Take, for example, the litigation, the judicial forums in India. Income Tax Appellate Tribunal is the only specialist forum when it comes to tax litigation. But when it goes to the honorable constitutional courts, Their lordships have their strength in their ability to understand the nuances of law. But unless this is supported by a deep, thorough clinical analysis of the technical part with respect to that branch, it wouldn't work. So what is really needed? If you ask me, maybe you need expert witnesses. Maybe you need a system where this kind of litigation is preempted. And in the present budget, you see a brilliant example in the safe harbor. Who could have imagined that it would go up from 300 crores to 2,000 crores? Who could have visualized that they'll put all the five, kind of IT services in one basket? So government is contributing its bit, but the taxpayer behavior also has to change. And I'm happy to say that it has changed very considerably. There is only one, I would, if I can say, use this term, one kind of or breed of taxpayers who go into that excessive litigation. An overwhelming majority is happy to pay their taxes, is happy to, call it quits when it's required. The trouble is because in some of the areas, revenue authorities are so cautious, and that's again a cultural issue, that they would err on the side of excessive caution, that this litigation continues. Allow me to say so, that with the kind of legal framework that you have today, with the kind of change in the values of the taxpayers that you have today, the moment the tax gatherers have more functional, I would say, being away from pressures, I wouldn't call it freedom, they stop, inflicting that pressure upon themselves, then things would change. And that is happening slowly. It's happening slowly, but it's happening in that direction. So you are looking at a situation where litigation is reducing, and the government is doing everything at its disposal to do so. There are some, for example, bottlenecks. There are in some areas, there are some issues where undoubtedly there are bottlenecks, but I'm sure this can also be resolved if the same process continues. Just to give you one statistics, just think about it, that in 2014, when the present government came, if somebody was to win an appeal in the income tax appellate tribunal, even if the appeal involved as something as low as probably 3 lakhs or 10 lakhs, please correct me, Dr. Chopra, if I'm wrong, I don't remember the figure, then they could go to the High Court. Today, the way that number has changed from 3 lakhs to 10 lakhs, 10 lakhs to 50 lakhs, I mean, the way that number has changed for the Supreme Court, the way that number has changed for the High Court. So government is on one hand reducing very considerably their litigation. On the other hand, it's ensuring that people have a graceful exit when they want to get out of litigation, pay their taxes, bring it a closer. There were amnesty schemes, the Kar Vivad Samadhan, Vivad Se Vishwas, not Kar Vivad Samadhan, I'm sorry, Vivad Se Vishwas. So everything that can be done and which is there in the textbook to bring this culture to an end is being done. It needs little more fine tuning. Take, for example, buyback tax, which you mentioned. I'll just briefly say, look at the kind of changes they have brought in buyback tax, as Dr. Chopra mentioned. Now, they have ensured that a reasonable taxpayer who is not promoter, and he is not a promoter for a good reason. One can say that you should have a horizontal equity, you should have the kind of tax neutrality, but also think of the fact that a promoter has access to the, that kind of, by virtue of their influence over corporate decision making, they can structure the flow. So on one hand, government has ensured that this arbitrage stops. There's no advantage to a promoter to take it in some other form. On the other hand, they have ensured that if you have a reasonable case, then it can be treated as a capital gain. It will not be capital loss to be, which should wait for some gain to arise in future. And taxation has to be on a reasonable basis. I think everything that you do, and I'm happy to say this, everything that you see in the steps being taken by the government, that does very consciously put a disincentive to litigation, or I would put it in a positive way, which promotes an early and decent closure going away from litigation. But then it's a cultural issue, and all these cultural issues, taxpayer stakeholders have as much of a role to play as much as the establishment has.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Before I let you go, if you are fine, then you can take one question, and it's the same question that I would put to each of you, and you have a choice to give a pass or respond to it. So it's the road ahead. if any announcement, any particular element in this budget were to be remembered, let's say 5 years from now, because we all agreed in this conversation that it's a budget that we're building for tomorrow, not today. So what one reform or a missed opportunity would define its legacy for India's journey towards Viksit Bharat? We'll start with Dr. Chopra.
No, I personally feel that if you want a Viksit Bharat, you need far more budget, higher budget for the education and of course the health sector. I think these are the two things. Of course, on defense, we have spent a good amount. Out of 53 lakh crore, you have given 11 lakh crore to that also. And of course, 12 lakh to the capital outlay. I personally feel that health sector and the education in particular, where very frankly, if you ask me, of course, they have talked of labs to be created, 15,000 labs to be created for the animation in the various schools. But I think education, to my mind, I personally feel if at all we are lagging behind the developed nations, it's because of the education, and our political system will also improve if our educational system improves.
Thank you, sir.
One thing-
If I may repeat the question, sir. One element in this budget as we are building a new India to make India future ready, what is that 5 years from now you will see that as a reform or a missed opportunity that would define the legacy of this Viksit Bharat?
Reform, certainly, yes. I wouldn't think of the missed opportunity because it's a journey. It's not a destination. One thing I would borrow from Robin, very thoughtful observation, that if we have to really go to the Viksit Bharat, we have to change our attitude to the skill development, and we have to have a cultural change about that. Instead of having the skills which were required for a colonial India, I think we need skills which are required for a Viksit Bharat. That's one. Second thing I would think, we have to graduate from the level of ease of doing business to promoting a culture which is suitable for the world capital of innovation and entrepreneurship. We have to borrow something from Gujarat. I mean, we have to have entrepreneurship as a part of life with every one of us. And from a very kind of limited perspective of my area, which is the area where I spent almost a quarter century, from the point of view of adjudication and tax dispute, I think it's a time for some conscious and structural reforms in the dispute redressal mechanism to ensure that this ectopia between what's right on the first principles and what's sustainable in law reduces considerably, and people have greater faith in the predictability of the system. And once again, that's an area where taxpayers also have to contribute. It's a cultural issue where they have to be reasonable. Judicial institutions have to be reasonable and better equipped to adjudicate on the issues which come before that.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Ravin Banerjee, sir, your turn.
If we have to look at 5 years from today, I would think there are two missed opportunities. One is Viksit Bharat is all about not high GDP, but it is per capita income. Today, the country is $3,000 per person per year. This has to become $12,000 per person per year to become Viksit Bharat, which is developed economy, which means equalization of income. That has not been done enough. Everyone needs to earn much more. The bottom 10%, the bottom 40% has to earn much more, which can happen and which could happen through a better social security measure. India does not have a good social security measure as is being practiced in the developed world, which is Europe and America. One. Number two, the government of India needs money. And we all said more money should have been gone on education and so on and so forth. Where will the money come from? Government has money. Where? Through divestment. It is sitting on dead assets. They should divest those dead assets. This is the time they need to do this investment. Not 80,000 crore. Why not 3 lakh crore, 4 lakh crore of divestment? That's the time. This is the time to do it. So two things. We need to make equalization of income much more profound than what we have. The government now needs to get some more cash innovatively, and that I think it's still possible. But yes, these two I think are some sort of a small, not small, a missed opportunity, which perhaps we would be thinking about it in the future.
Great, sir. Quite resonating. I think all of us would agree to your closing remark. This is the point where government needs cash, and we must do everything to get those cash into their hand and put the money where it matters the most. With this, we get into the closing remark, and this discussion makes clear this budget cannot be judged only by the allocations or announcements that was there in the FM's budget speech, but by the intent it signals. And that is what during our conversations we were referring to, the discipline that it demonstrates and the institutional trust it enforces. When I say discipline, obviously the distractions that have been avoided, so that like Mr. Pramod Kumar and others were quite repeatedly referring to, there may not be headline grabbing stuff, but to say that nobody can hold a view that this budget had nothing thoughtful, rather it contained a lot of things that probably will start yielding results in time to come. On the fiscal prudence front, on the tax certainty, dispute resolution, or even the governance credibility, the real test of this budget will lie not just in the announcement, rather in the execution and the consistency over time, because budget may be an annual exercise, but the budget not necessarily has to be everything or can be executed just in next 12 months. So it extends beyond over the time, it has to be adjusted. And reforms that has been the fulcrum of our conversation, it doesn't mature when it is announced, okay, but when they endure scrutiny, deliver predictability, and strengthen the rule of law. I thank our distinguished panelists for bringing a clarity, candor, and constitutional perspective to this discussion. Their insights remind us that sound public finance is ultimately about credibility of numbers, of institutions, and of intent, because all three have to be in a straight line, because they can't operate in silos. Then there are disconnect what we hear and what we see. On that thoughtful note, we conclude this post-budget conversation, one that will undoubtedly continue as India starts its path towards a more resilient and confident economic future. And thank you, our learned guest, for sparing the time, and the viewers who enlightened with your incisive views on this budget 2026. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
Really
very much.
appreciate your time.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Robin, and
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Pleasure being with you, and look forward to see you again.